Seema, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. Thank you so much for taking part in this interview today. I'm very happy to have you here. And you are a mythologist, and that is changing the world one story at a time. What inspired you to be so open with your audience and share messages through storytelling? And do you have a favorite story that inspired you to start this?
Well, Venus, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Yes, I do think that stories are just about the most powerful tool of influence in the universe. You know, our identities are defined by the stories that we tell. So if there are stories of how a man comes home and he's drunk and he beats up his wife, but she's such a good woman, she's so good, she never says anything to him, she always keeps quiet about it, then you've already established what the identity of a good woman is supposed to be. So over time, you realize that we all act according to the stories that we tell, or the stories that we've chosen to silence. That's what really impacts our lives. And so, I decided that it was these stories that had to be explored, because if you're going to make change, then it is only when you change the stories that that change will happen. That's what led me to stories to begin with. And as I said, as I started to explore this idea of identity through stories, I realized that we never ever tell stories of a woman's right to her own body, her own sexuality. That's always someone else's property. And so, particularly being of Indian origin, having grown up, having been born in India, grown up in India, I realized that coming from a society that actually wrote the Kama Sutra, what are the stories that we had silenced? Because surely there was another world out there that we seem to have bypassed and missed. And that's what took me to this idea of exploring the stories of sensuality, exploring the stories of a woman's right to her own pleasure, because the stories are there, they've just been silenced. And the rest is history, as they say.
I have a copy of the Kama Sutra in Spanish here that someone gave me a few years ago. So you are a Kama Sutra expert. I think when people think of Kama Sutra, they think of lots of sex positions. But it's not just that, is it? What is the Kama Sutra?
So yes, you're absolutely right. People talk of the Kama Sutra, and I'm sure, I don't know what your version is like, but I have a feeling that it's mostly based on the arts of pleasure and very little else. I don't know if it has
the rest. It has a lot of text in it as well. And then
it's just okay. So the Kama Sutra was originally written sometime in 300 something AD as a book to explain to the urbane man, to the wealthy man, how to live the perfect lifestyle. So it's a lifestyle book. And I always say to people, and they're always surprised when I say this, that the book was written for men. It was not written for women, because going back to that time, 300 something AD, women were not taught how to read or write. So the book was written for men, and the book is written in 7 sections. So the first section talks about how a man should find the perfect location for his house, how he should build it, how many bedrooms there should be, how many minor birds and parrots he should keep in his garden, and how many hours he should spend talking to them, how many hours should be spent getting himself massaged, and what should be his idea of ornamentation. The second section is on the arts of pleasure. The third section is on how to go look for the perfect wife. The fourth section is how to marry the perfect wife. The fifth section is how to seduce another man's wife. I mean, it's like there's also a section on that. And it's a very politically motivated thing, because there might be a reason to seduce somebody else's wife, because her husband might be of use to you, or he might be able to give you a position of power or something. So there's quite a lot to the text. The sixth section is about the courtesans, because courtesanery back then was a state-regulated profession. And so there's lots of rules around that, and how much they're allowed to charge, what all they can do, etc. And the seventh section, which I think was added much later, is a bit of a pointless section. It's all about magic potions and lotions. And quite honestly, I don't think that there's anything of any worth in there. And I think it was put in as a sort of, oh, look, we've added this section of magic potions and lotions, and it suddenly makes it acceptable. I don't know why that was put in there. But the section that people pick up always, the little bit, which is the positions, which is actually a teensy little part of the section on the arts of pleasure. It's not even the entire thing. And I think that's because they picked that up because it's the only word that they understood. The rest of the Kama Sutra, it's a treatise. It's written, as are all treatises, in metaphors. It's a grammarian's book. And most of those metaphors have never been translated. People don't understand what they meant. So they went for the positions. And of course, over time, it just became the easiest thing to focus on. I must admit that I always focus, I am particularly interested in the second section, which is the arts of pleasure. The reason that I'm interested in that is because this is the only place where I think they were trying to change the narrative of women, because that section is totally devoted to how a man must understand a woman's pleasure, how he must treat a woman, how he must understand how to bring her to complete pleasure. And I have a feeling, I mean, when you read the Kama Sutra, if anybody out there decides to read the Kama Sutra, they will see for themselves that you don't actually talk about the act of sex at any point. So you talk about positions, but we're not actually talking about the act of sex. And there was a reason why that the idea of positions was put in. Would you like to know why they are?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. I guess maybe people didn't read. If people couldn't read back then, maybe it was a visual part that anyone could understand. Would that be a reason?
No, there weren't actually paintings in the original one. It was written as a text. And as I said, it's funny because this bit was actually written to change the narrative of women, even though we'd like to believe that in the time of the Kama Sutra, there's so much importance being given to the pleasure of women that maybe it was a different society altogether. There was always a parallel strand of patriarchy that was trying to put the women down. So this is being written really to make people understand that there's a whole different narrative, or to get people to change the way that they think of women. And it's interesting because in the introduction, it actually says that, I mean, the book is about karma. It's about love, or the aspects of love in all its many different ways. A lot of people think that karma means lust. It doesn't.
So what does Kama Sutra mean then? So what does it mean?
Sutra means the thread. So literally, this is talking about so if you translate it directly, it's about the thread of love, or the story of love. The sutra is literally a story or a narrative that follows a thread. So the Kama Sutra literally means when you live your life, they say that there are three basic principles to life. So you live according to dharma, which is your social responsibilities, artha, which is your financial responsibilities, build up a business, earn your money, and kama, which is your emotional relationships. So karma is to do with love in all its aspects. It's not just lust or physical pleasure. Yeah, it's not. No, because somebody recently said to me, "Oh, it means lust," and I was like, "No, it doesn't just mean physical pleasure. It means pretty much everything. It's just what we've come to understand what it means." And so I was going to say first about the positions because I get a bit carried away. It's a very exciting subject as far as I'm concerned, but to just explain, it says that if you are going to make love, it should always be entirely mutually pleasurable. Otherwise, there's no point to sex. There's no point to making love if it is not completely mutually pleasurable. And the very first thing towards making it mutually pleasurable is if the sexual organs of both partners are in sync, if they're the same kind of size. So if the woman is too big and the man is too small, she's not going to feel any of the excitement. He's not going to feel the excitement. If she's too small, he's too big, there's just going to be pain and discomfort. So the first thing is that the organs have to be the same size, but nobody ever in history was like, I'd love to get together with you, but what is the size of your, genitalia? It's not possible. So the positions were created to help people synchronize their sizes. Oh, wow. So if the woman was very big and the man was really small, it was about what kind of positions would make her a little bit smaller. So she could lie on her side, if she pulled her knees up a little bit. So those are the positions that she would follow. If the man was very short, then there were certain positions that help deeper penetration. If the woman's very small and he's too big, again, there are different positions for that. And that's why the positions were actually created. They were not created for some kind of gymnastic display.
That's fascinating, because I've always said, because people always ask me if size is important. I've always said that genital compatibility is more important. And I think people blame the men all the time, when in fact, actual fact is about both. And I think, is there any kind of recommendations for pelvic floor training in the Kama Sutra, like exercises?
Well, I think that there's generally a lot of recommendation for exercise, and because they say that that's really great for you. But one of the things that they talk about, because you do get to a point where people have different abilities, different capacities. Not everybody can sort of do pelvic floor exercises. And it's not just the woman's responsibility. As I said, this book was actually putting a lot of the responsibility on the man to make sure that he was the one pleasuring the woman, not the other way around for most of it. And again, like I said, that's a big myth that we have in society, that it's the woman's responsibility. Not so according to the Kama Sutra. And one of the things that it does recommend for any of your readers who are out there and thinking, well, how can they actually change things around to make their genital compatibility easier? It says that every bedroom should have at least 8 cushions of different sizes and shapes that should be put under different parts of your body. Because each time you put one under your body in a different place and a different shape, it changes the angle of penetration. And they say that a woman's vagina has something like 24 pleasure spots. So not just the one G spot, there's about 24 pleasure spots. It's every spot has its own sensation. So it's not a generic kind of, you hit that spot and you're going to be like, oh, I'm just so passionately aroused because it's also exciting. One spot might make you feel really chilled out. Another spot might make you feel very aroused. Another one might make you feel very satisfied. Another one might make you feel really mellow. It's just, each one is different. And that's what passion, arousal, pleasure, intimacy should be about. And hence, as I said, the 8 cushions are, it's an easy way of going about it. But as I was saying, what's really interesting is that I think personally, it was written to change the narrative of women, because when you read the introduction of the Kama Sutra, it actually has this, and the Kama Sutra has been translated by a lot of people. We've lost a lot of it. I found this in a commentary written in the 11th century by a Buddhist monk. And it says over there that men are told that if they can take the time and effort to bring a woman completely to pleasure, their wife, their partner, whoever it is, that their life will become better. So if you can pleasure your wife fully, your business will do better. Because they've got to make the change aspirational. Your business will do better because she won't just go out and waste your money. She won't go and splurge on unnecessary things. She won't go off and have affairs. She will look after your household very, very carefully because she feels so, satisfied in herself.
And also the sacral chakra is like associated with sexuality and money. So I guess that makes
absolutely sense. So, that is the whole point of, so they were trying to make it really aspirational for men. And it's so sad because those are the things that have been lost in our translations, in our taking the text forward. It even says that if you can be a super good lover and really pleasure your partner, you can be a better warrior. Because your body can only really do so much, right? It's a restrictive amount that you can do with your physical body. But with those restrictions, if every day when you're together or every time you're together, you can bring an element of surprise, something new somehow that will excite her, you can take that same skill to the battlefield where you can approach your enemy with something different that will take them by surprise and give it the edge. And there were even battle positions named after lovemaking positions.
Wow. So what did women do for contraception back then? Because I think I'm so glad I was born in this era, because I think I'm so happy that, contraception is quite easy to come by. Because I think the fear of getting pregnant must be a massive obstacle in the way for female pleasure in the past.
I think that it always would have been. I'm very sure. So the Kama Sutra does talk about some form of contraception. It doesn't talk about it a lot. As I said, this was more as information for men and teaching them how to pleasure the woman as opposed to a lifestyle text for women to follow. So there would have been certain amounts of contraception. The stuff that they noted down came in the chapter that I said was around lotions and potions, and it did not inspire me with any level of confidence. So I won't actually tell you what they said about you, but there were things like, a certain amount of oil. If you put oil in your vagina, if you lubricate your vagina with a greasier substance, which we today say that is not such a good thing to do, but they say that that will actually stop the flow of sperm. Then there were certain types of things were used, as sort of preventatives. Yeah, but like I said, it's not something that I'm going to suggest from the Kama Sutra, because I find that whenever I talk about something, even if I say truly don't use it, please, because I don't think it's so great, people will still pick it up and go with it.
Yes,
so
I understand. So currently in Indian culture, do you think the younger generation has had a disconnect from this history of pleasure?
Totally and entirely. I think that it's not just the younger generation. This has been happening for several generations, because as society changed, as it developed, ideas change anyway. And India's been subject to invasions as far back as I can remember. So as other cultures come in, they start to change the ideology, they start to change the roles. And so as far as we can tell, the ideals of the Kama Sutra, the teachings of the Kama Sutra seem to have been quite prevalent up until the 6th, 7th century. And then after that, things seem to go back into change. Now, interestingly, the Kama Sutra inspired around 2,000 years of literature. So, I mean, we have a lot of literature, a lot of love epics based on the metaphors of the Kama Sutra, all about pleasure and how, things like the Kama Sutra talks about the 64 skills. Most people think that the 64 skills are about how to become a super good lover, that you do this. And it's not. The 64 skills are really diverse. So they include everything from singing and dancing to botany, to gemology, to understanding how to make things out of metal, learn woodwork and quail fighting, all of this. And these things, word riddles, etc., brain games, all of this was meant to make you a more diverse personality so that you become a more desirable lover, somebody who becomes more exciting to be with because you can talk about so many different things, you have so many different interests. It wasn't nothing in this world except experience and practice and a serious amount of conscious thought will make you a better lover. You can become a more desirable lover, but popping a pill won't make you a better lover. Viagra will give you a longer erection. It won't make you better at what you do. There's a huge difference. And I think people forget that. So we have lost a lot of these teachings along the way. But as I said, the literature has followed that strand. So I was saying to you earlier about the metaphors, for instance. Did you know that in ancient times, every single position was taught to the women, particularly through pieces of jewelry?
Oh, wow.
So you learned how to make love. Yeah, I know. Isn't that very exciting? So one of the things I always say as an example is in ancient times, a woman in any culture, in an ancient culture, you weren't supposed to be on top during lovemaking because that was the position of power. So if you know the story of Lilith, she tells Adam that she has the right to be on top. They're made from the same mud. And she's thrown out of paradise for saying that.
Oh, wow.
Because, it was considered such a sinful thing to do. The Kama Sutra says you can be on top. But the idea of being on top was that you only move your hips for ultimate pleasure. You don't move the upper part of your body. And I also personally think that if you've tried being on top ever, that if you don't do it right, you do hurt your back. So they say that you only move your hips. And to learn how to do this, women would wear these jingling girdles bells across their upper waist with lots and lots of little tiny bells on them, and make sure that the bells didn't make a sound.
Oh, wow. That's quite a challenge.
Yeah. So, so there was this whole thing of, in our literature, we never say that, oh, and then, she's with her lover and she climbs up on top and you just say she put on her jingling girdle. And you knew that she had taken her position on top, or he is going to send her a jingling girdle made of silver or gold. And you know that this is a relationship of very deep, mutual, pleasurable respect and intimacy. So, each position had its own piece of jewelry. And I just think that even as a woman today, you think, this whole idea when we go to bed with our partner, when you make love, you wash off your makeup, you get into your old nightie, you turn off the lights. It's like, back then they said that this was really special. You got dressed for it. So there were the different ornamentations, the different type of perfuming, because you said this was special. It was beautiful. It was something that you wanted to make sure would be just fabulous between you. So you treated it differently.
I guess it was last a long time. And I've been reading your book, The Arts of Seduction, over the last week. It's very interesting. I love reading, as you can see. I don't have a TV here, it's just books. And I found it really interesting. What I really loved about the opening of the book, it talks about sex being an experience, the difference between a fuck and an experience. I really feel like that, because I think in modern times with this porn or Tinder culture, it's kind of like the McDonald's of sex. It's like fast food. It's taking away the real joy or the beauty of intimacy, which is the most beautiful part of having sex in general, isn't it? When it's just more than the physical, it's just like a whole experience. You don't need to go out because you have so much fun with your partner. It's really, really beautiful. And some of the things that surprised me and interested me in this book, you start off with the art of perfuming. I found that really interesting because I haven't worn deodorant for 5 years now. So I was thinking, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. But I think we live in a culture where I like the way you talked about natural pheromones as well, how perfumes and oils can blend with your own smell. Because I think a lot of perfumes these days and deodorants, there's kind of an obsession with masking our natural smell. And in any supermarket, we can find products like intimate wash for the vulva, but there's no penis cleaner. So why is that? So I think, how can we get a balance between celebration of pheromones and perfume?
So I actually wrote the book literally to translate the metaphors, because as I said that, people read the Kama Sutra, they don't really know what is the nuances that it's talking about. And there are a lot of nuances. And I think that particularly, so it says that a sexual relationship or an intimate relationship where you do have sex together, that it will be longer lasting and more pleasurable if the woman does feel the same amount of pleasure. Because a lot of times it is the woman that gets so bored with the monotony, becomes more like a chore. You bring it to an end, you're like, okay, I've had it. And, everything kind of goes belly up because both partners don't feel the same excitement. And I'm always trying to say to men that if you can find it in yourself to take the time to pleasure her really, really fully, if she can come to that kind of pleasure, your own pleasure will go up tenfold, because it's just how it works. It's just the way that it works. But when it comes to perfume, I'm always fascinated by, so yes, it is so much easier, I guess. You go to a supermarket, you pick up XYZ perfume, you spray it on. The old style of perfuming, the natural perfumes, it just took that much longer. But I just think it was so sexy because, like you said, it gave you the chance to create your own individual smell. So it wasn't about masking your smell. It was about enhancing it, because we all have our own perspiration. We all have our own smell. And each perfume was left on there for long enough to mix with your own smells. So you started perfuming yourself in the morning, and by the evening, it had actually mingled with your smells, and you then had your own very distinct individual flavor. And I think there's something very exciting, literally, about doing that, because it's just, I mean, if one, just rubbing perfume on yourself or rubbing perfume oil on yourself makes you feel amazing, it's just that contact with the skin. But it wasn't, again, like I said, it wasn't just for the women. It was equally for the men. So back then, there is this whole schedule of how long men were supposed to spend on their toiletries, on their toilet, on their ablutions. I get the word wrong. On their ablutions. So, they were supposed to be massaged with different perfumed oils. They were supposed to also make sure, for instance, that, India is a hot country. The weather is very different. And when you go out in the sun, you're likely to perspire. So when you lean forward to talk to somebody, that, how did you do that? So men actually wore garlands of different kinds of scented flowers around the neck and so on. So, and yes, it also tells them how often they're supposed to get rid of their pubic hair, how often they're supposed to clean certain things. So yeah, in ancient times, we had the penis cleaners.
It's interesting how there's all this pressure on women for those products, but there's nothing for men. It's like really unfair, because I think that really has a negative impact on female sexuality today. For example, there's many men who really enjoy cunnilingus, but women who are like too uptight to actually just let go, and enjoy it, that are thinking about what it looks like or what it smells like, what it tastes like. Whereas there are many enthusiastic cunnilinguists out there, and I do believe that is part of the problem with all these this obsession with intimate cleaner and how available it is.
It's just awful. I mean, but also it's so I recently did a reel and about saying to women that the smell of their vagina, the smell of a natural healthy vagina, the natural smell of a healthy vagina is the most exciting thing in the world. Absolutely. And then I said about how perfume makers have been trying to put that smell into perfumes as a base, and and it was just a case of just to say, let's normalize it, ladies, you're okay. There was nothing more intended. You should see the kind of trolling I have had from men saying, how dare you say this? You are so disgusting. What do you mean it's a natural? And oh my God, it's just been unbelievable. And then a bunch of men saying, what about my penis? Hey, go find somebody to talk about a penis. Yes, there are scents based around the penis. Go find them. I'm not particularly interested in telling you about them.
Well, I actually saw an advert a few years ago that was trying to make a perfume out of that smell, and the advertisement was really funny. It was like these guys in the gym sniffing the saddles that the women had just used. It was really funny.
That came from that lady. God, I can't remember her name, but I can't remember the name of the perfume. Is it called? I can't remember. Sorry, but where she would literally take the panties off the models when they came off the catwalk and smell them.
I think it was devised, the smell from many different women. I wrote about it in an article years ago called "Scent of a Woman" for El País newspaper, maybe about 8 years ago or something.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. It's actually found, they took lots of examples and then made an actual perfume that was supposed to be.
And of course, now you have Erykah Badu with her vagina incense, and you've got Gwyneth Paltrow's candle. This smells like my vagina, and you know what? It's like I put all these things in the caption of the reel, and I still had people saying, "That's such nonsense. Who says? Which are these perfumes? Damn it, read." Find out.
But there are lots of fans of that anyway. Because I mean, one thing that really turns me on is when a guy is like really into that smell and like is like going and shamelessly like going, like, we are animals, So it's just like, wow. I find it very, very interesting.
It is a very exciting smell.
So let's talk about dildos. That was very interesting. You said that people made their own dildos. Do you think that was to make objects for personal preference, or was it because it's a personal object, you don't want other people to see it?
No, I believe, and like I said, so much of this has been lost. So we're kind of trying to go back and research from other literature that followed on from the Kama Sutra to get explanations. But so making dildos for the woman was not an unusual thing in ancient China. It was a bridal gift. So when a girl got married, she was given a replica of her husband's penis. in a beautifully decorated lacquer box. And often they would put his photo at the bottom or his signature at the bottom, so that if he was away for a long period of time on work, she didn't have to deprive herself of the pleasure. The Kama Sutra says that it was extremely important that the woman was given an instrument of pleasure, but it was about her pleasure, because we say that every vagina is different. And so it was up to the man to learn how to make something that would suit her pleasure, not just to give her a replica of his own one. And it was interesting because that was one way of introducing variety to their lovemaking, because you had different types of instruments that you could use. I mean, part of it, of course, becomes like the courtesan saying, well, if you make me one in gold, it would make me so happy, because it would remind me totally of you, because you're like my golden boy. But, that was a little bit of give me some gold. So, yeah, there's a little bit of both. Let's be honest, this is real life. It's not a utopian, idealistic world. But yeah, the idea of making the dildos was to introduce variety into a relationship. And often they were used together by couples. So it wasn't just that the woman had to go off into a little hidey hole, use it by herself. It was for both of them to use together as mutual pleasure. And sometimes also to take the pressure off the man, because, you can't always expect the man to perform at the same rate or the same level every single day. There were also slightly different things that they could use. And I found that really interesting. So one of the things that it talks about is how they would wrap a string of pearls around their penis.
Like and a cock ring.
Yeah, like a cock ring, but it would be sort of like, a little bit more. So that would not only change the size, but also the feeling of it, the texture of it when it went in and out. And I just thought that was such a fabulous idea. But I have to say, each time I say this, lots of lube, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh yeah,
lots of lube. Very important. The other one was that I think was really fabulous when it comes to different instruments for sex is the silver balls, the little pleasure balls that they used. Now, here, what they would do is you'd have two little tiny silver balls on a little string or a ribbon. One of them would have a drop of mercury in it.
Okay.
Sealed into it, and the other one was empty. So when you put it inside and you walked around doing your housework, the mercury would heat up and it would start to vibrate. So it would give you that little bit of pleasure as you walked around doing your housework. But what I love is the idea of the second ball. It just tinkled very gently, so it gave you a beautiful sound. So the idea of pleasure really was about beauty. It wasn't about, oh yeah, I really feel like I need to knock one up for myself, I need to get one orgasm out or whatever. It was just imagine, actually thinking that far, that the second ball would just give you a beautiful little sound, and that would pleasure you, your other senses.
It must have been good for the pelvic floor as well to do that.
Yeah, I guess it's much like the Kegel balls in a way. And I just think that so actually it's really interesting, because that became so popular as an idea that the British East India Company started to bring back a lot of those when they were in India. And then a black market started in it, because the locals in India realized that the British wanted it. So they started to replace the mercury with other liquid. And because mercury was more expensive and difficult to come by. And then there was a law laid against selling fake goods with replacement mercury and so on. So there was like a whole life that existed around these pleasure balls.
Wow. Interesting, you talked about oral sex as well, and I think you talked about the Catholic Church outlawed it or something.
Yeah, in 342 AD.
Wow, and I think about oral sex, I think it's, I guess maybe it's more a recent phenomenon. I'm not sure if it was done maybe in my grandparents' time, because I'm from a very Catholic Irish family. And even I remember I was watching the film Parenthood in the 90s, where it was a big deal when the wife went down on Steve Martin, I think, when he was driving. That was like, wow, it was kind of a taboo thing, whereas now it's very normal, but it's been around for a long time. So it's very interesting about it, and how it was okay to go to courtesans. That was interesting.
Yeah, the Kama Sutra has so much to say on oral sex because there's a certain amount. So, like I said, people think that this is the time when everything was wonderful and utopian in the world of sex. It wasn't. The world was very similar to what it is, and there was different strands of people, different lines of people who believed in different things. The chapter on oral sex is it sort of bounces around a little bit because he can't quite make up his mind whether he wants to really come out and say it's fabulous, go ahead, do it, don't think about anything else, because there's a lot of other literature from ancient India saying this is bad, you shouldn't do it. But the Ecumenical Council of the Catholic Church does ban it, and their records show that they banned it in 342 AD, anal sex and oral sex both, because sex should only be for procreation, and this was clearly not about procreation, it was just about pleasure, so it's banned. The Kama Sutra then describes 8 different ways that a man should perform oral sex on a woman, and 8 different ways that a woman should. So 8 different ways of how it should. I'm going to correct myself when I say this, because it should be 8 different ways of how it should be performed on a man, how it should be performed on a woman. It doesn't matter who performs it. And its first thing is that if you ask a woman to do it on you, you have to be prepared to do it back for her.
Oh, that's great.
Otherwise, it's not fair. Yeah. And hence it says, and because there's another text that says you can never ask your wife to do it for you, otherwise your ancestors will suffer in hell for extra lifetimes. And, so it's quite a sort of, so it says that if you feel that it's a sin, then you paid somebody to do it for you. And generally it was like you paid your masseuse or your barber. That's so yeah, it's not, don't think of masseuse and barber in today's terminology. Back then, these are the people that are generically referred to as performing several of these tasks. And it says that with a man, because you would pay him to do it, so there's no sin attached to him, and you didn't have to perform it back on them. You could tweak his nipple in like as a little giving of pleasure for him. So that's as far as you had to go. But what it goes on to say is that you need to learn how to do oral sex properly, because if you perform oral sex on somebody, people tend to do it in exactly the same way each time. And you would end up stimulating the same set of nerves each time, and the other nerves would never get stimulated. And then there would be this imbalance, which would then lead to an unhealthy situation. So it tells you about the 8 different types of kisses that need to be used so that all the nerves get stimulated.
Fantastic. Speaking about all the different nerves, it was interesting, the chapter about moon phases. Actually, this podcast, I publish every new moon and full moon because I'm really into moon rituals. So how can the lunar calendar affect sexuality?
So they basically say, now there's a lot of scholars that don't necessarily agree with this point. I think it's spot on, but they basically say that as the moon moves in its phases, our erogenous zones move around our body because it pulls and pushes the liquid inside us, the water inside us. So different parts of your body become more sensitive. Now, it can be your energy points, it can be your erogenous zones, it can be anything that you want to call it, depending on whatever subject you're studying. But the idea was that your energy points do get moved around your body. So each day, it would be worth understanding which part of the body is really, really sensitive, and then stimulating that for a better orgasm. And this happens both for men and for women. So it's not just the women who have their erogenous zones moving around. And I just think that it's a fascinating idea. So the calendar there, the lunar calendar, they say that the original text was a really, really comprehensive text. It doesn't exist anymore, we've lost it. But it says that it kind of categorized men and women by their different physical, emotional, and mental characteristics, and said how they would feel pleasure in different parts of their body, how those parts should be stimulated. So some might just want it rubbed, somebody else might want it pinched, somebody else might want it pressed with the thumb. So it was a very comprehensive text, which got lost. And so all we've got is the excerpts that later writers chose to reference or to quote. So it's a little bit more limited, but as I said, a lot of a lot of scholars say that this is nonsense, that this doesn't actually exist. And I always say that even if you think it doesn't exist, it's a fantastic way to add variety to your lovemaking. Because if you think that on that day, the text is telling you that this is where your erogenous zone is, then you would automatically change how you make love that day. You'd add a different element to it, wouldn't you?
Definitely. And I think it's interesting because recently I used to live in a penthouse apartment, so I started to be more aware of the moon because I had such a great view of it. So I really started following the lunar calendar, and now my menstrual cycle is synced up with the moon. It's like full moon, like the same day period. It's kind of interesting because I think that could be no coincidence that a menstrual cycle is very similar to the moons. We are like little planets, different every day. That's what I feel like as being a woman.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Another thing that surprised me in your book is the chapter about love bites. When I think about love bites, I think about, adolescent, making out with someone, when you were a bit younger. And then I don't know why, but we get to control those urges a bit more. As I don't know. It's been a long time since I've had a love bite, I think. So what do you think about that?
Well, again, I think much like you, we all grew up with very similar philosophies. I think that the world is run by very similar philosophies on sexuality and lovemaking. But yes, in the time of the Kama Sutra, love bites were not just something that you jumped on your partner and you did. It was a very special skill, and you had to learn how to give love bites in order to be allowed to give love bites. And the rules around love bites were so intense because every bite had its own message, every bite had its own occasion, and every bite had its own shape. So, like today we've got text messaging, and you can tell your lover how you feel. In those days, they didn't have phones. Yeah. So in those days, they pretty much used other things to send messages or to leave messages. So love scratches and love bites had a huge vocabulary for lovers. And what I love about it is it says that if you had bad teeth, you were not allowed to give love bites to your lover because it would bring dishonor to you, because this is a time when it's a courtly society. So your love bites would be displayed. And having a lover who could give you the right shape of love bites you were very fortunate. Like, it was a big thing. So you displayed them. And some were hidden and some were to be displayed. And the ultimately skilled love bite it's known as the bindu, or the dot. And it's not the most passionate love bite at all. Actually, I don't think it's a passionate love bite at all, because it takes a lot of time and effort to do. But it was the most skilled one. And so you were like, wow, he can do this. So it was basically where you nipped the skin between two teeth so that you left a mark the size of a sesame seed. And after having done that, you then spaced these marks out to create necklace shapes. And I think that it's fantastic, because you can imagine a man sitting over there kind of measuring out, okay, now the next one goes over here. Tick, now I do this bite and oops, I went wrong. Let me start again. It's not going to allow him to get too aroused. But the woman, because she has that much physical contact, and it's going to give her time to be more aroused. So I think it was almost like a formula, like an equation, to be able to hold the man back and give the woman more space and more time to feel the arousal. But what I love about this is that you could send love bites as a gift. So on flower petals, you could leave love bites and send that. And because each one had its own message and occasion, it would be like a love letter, which everybody could understand, because even if you couldn't read or write. So yeah, I just think that the whole idea, it's personally, I believe that it was based on the structure of Plato's Republic. And Plato wrote the Republic to say that he was creating the perfect society, with very militant ideas. I think the Kama Sutra writes this to create the most refined society, because it says that how a society treats its woman's pleasure is the marker for how refined it is. how it looks at pleasure is the marker for how refined it is.
Hopefully we'll get back to that in the future sometime.
Yes,
A couple of quick questions. Yeah, I hope, let's hope so, because I think it seems like we've kind of taken a step back, in terms of pleasure. Even in this liberal world now, lots of content about sexuality is about how to give a good blowjob. It's still kind of focused on male pleasure. Yeah. So a couple of quick questions. What's the book that changed your life? Was it the Kama Sutra, or do you have anything else that's changed your life?
So it's the Kama Sutra that started me off. When I first went into this idea of looking at what are the narratives that we'd silenced, I wasn't expecting to find as much as I did. And I kind of went to the Kama Sutra thinking, okay, I'm going to write a paper of 15,000 words and I'm going to move on. And it was as I started to explore, because so much didn't make sense. And I think it's the day that I discovered, as in a footnote in a book by Lee Siegel, this thing about the jingling girdle and about the different pieces of jewelry. I think actually, maybe that's the one I should say changed my life. I think that I'd come across a lot of stuff before that on perfume, and I'd got very excited. But I think that's the day that I thought everything else is going to be put aside. Everything else is going to take a backseat. I'm going to focus a lifetime's work on looking at what the Kama Sutra talks about, the ideas of pleasure.
Fantastic. And do you have a phrase or affirmation that you live by?
Yes, I always sign my book saying, let there be pleasure.
Oh, fantastic.
Because pleasure isn't just about sex. It is about so much else. And it starts in the brain. It always starts in the mind, doesn't it? It sort of filters down to different parts of your body.
Yeah, actually, I was watching someone who's a tantra expert, and they were talking about sex is in the body, not in the brain. And I thought, that's the opposite. I think everything's in the brain.
Everything is in the brain.
Yeah, no, I think that
everything is in the brain.
Pleasure is, let's say, in an intimate situation, it's about 90% about the energy between the people, and then 10% technique. Because sometimes you can have very conventional sex, but it's like fireworks, because of the emotions involved.
Absolutely. I mean, you might feel the sensations in different parts of your body naturally, but yeah, if the brain is not with it, you're not going to feel the pleasure.
Definitely. So where can people find you?
So I am on Instagram, I'm on YouTube under the same name. It's Seema Anand Storytelling. And there is, of course, the book. So, I mean, if you really just want to go off and explore a lot of the literature, I would suggest you read the book, just because it gives you an insight into the metaphors and what they were trying to talk about. And the next thing that I'm going to try and do, which I'm working on now very slowly and painfully, is on all the lost love festivals from ancient India. Because we had like 30 love festivals as opposed to the one Valentine's Day. And they were all based on the idea of arousing Mother Earth to her pleasure, because once your surroundings come to their fullness, it automatically arouses that pleasure within human beings, and it impacts us.
It sounds very holistic.
It is very holistic. It's unbelievably beautiful. And these love festivals included things like where women would go out and share a mouthful of wine with the tree trunk, because that would give the tree trunk the desire to blossom, or the tree the desire to blossom. And then that would bring about springtime, and then that would bring about your emotions and your passions and so on. So it's a fascinating subject. So yeah, that's the next thing that's hopefully on the horizon.
Hopefully looking forward to reading that. Thank you so much for taking part today in this interview on the Orgasmic Lifestyle podcast. It's definitely been a pleasure.
Thank you.